I am joined today on the Between the Levees podcast by Mr. Jeff Kindl, a recently retired Vice President of Gulf Operations for ACBL, based just outside New Orleans. Mr. Kindl, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Tim.
Do appreciate your time this morning. How's retirement going so far?
Very well. Busier than I thought I would be.
Yeah? With family or with work?
Both.
All right. Well, let's get to my standard questions here. Tell me where you were born, sir.
Outside of Chicago in Elmhurst, Illinois.
And what did your parents do growing up?
Let's see. My dad was in advertising and my mother was a homemaker.
What was life like growing up? Did you have any siblings?
Yeah, I had two younger sisters, 6 years and 10 years younger than me. And it was, grew up in the 50s and went to high school in the 60s, very calm. Send your kids outside. Don't worry about them. They'll come back. None of the pressures that you've got today.
Did your father fight in the war?
Yes. He was in the Navy in World War II.
What was his MOS?
He was like they had bombers that had gunners underneath on the bottom of the plane, and he was one of those.
That sounds absolutely terrifying. I have seen that in person and some movies with the hazards of that job.
Right.
Was he in the military after the war, or did he get out?
He was in the Cub minor league baseball system. And in fact, his name is in the 1945 World Series program when the Cubs played the Detroit Tigers, and he was listed as Cub affiliated players in the military. So then he started playing baseball when he came out of the service, and then slid into second base, and he was a pitcher and got up the next inning to pitch, and his knee just collapsed. And that was the end of the career. Today, you'd sew it back up and you'd be back on the mound in 8 to 12 months.
Were you born by then when he got injured?
Yes.
And did you follow him into sports at all?
No, he was left-handed. My youngest sister got the left-handed gene, and she is the elite athlete of the three of us. My other sister and I were above average, but that was about it.
Were you drawn to anything in school?
Math and science primarily. But I got a degree in general business from University of Missouri in 1970. And graduated from high school in 65 up in the Chicago area.
What happened in between? So it was 5 years in college?
Yeah, I dropped out for a year and worked and found out how good I had it in college, so I went back.
What was that, the introduction to the marine industry, or how did you find towboating?
A friend of mine in Columbia, Missouri, rode a bus with a guy who was going up to Joliet, Illinois to ship out of the National Maritime Union Hall in Joliet on the boats. And he did that, and by word of mouth, I got it. At one time, there was probably 80 guys out of Columbia shipping out of the hall. My parents lived about 45 minutes from Joliet, so you'd have to sit in the hall. Hopefully you get a call would come in for the need of deckhands. It was hard for a green guy to get on. But once you got on, then you were experienced even with just one day of work. And then it was easy to get a job after that. So it took about a month before I got on. And several times I would bring 2 or 3, 4 guys home with me, and they'd sleep on a couch or on the floor. And my parents didn't feel burdened by this at all. In fact, loved the company and the interactions. So, and this is the day back when, Motel 6 really cost $6. But nobody had any money, and they were happy to have a place just to sleep, and the transportation to and from Joliet.
And was that in the middle of school?
No, I was right before I graduated. Is when I did it after I graduated, and it was I did it for about 2.5 years with Valley Line, and and then went into the office with Sioux City and New Orleans Barge Lines in St. Louis as an operations clerk, working for a 20-year-old young woman who was extremely very sharp and a good teacher. And I learned a lot from her. And about 6 months later, I started barge and boat dispatching.
Tell me about those couple of years on deck.
A lot of work. I wasn't very strong back then and as big as I am now. And, lots of confusion. First couple of weeks, I thought about quitting about every 15 or 20 minutes. It took a couple of weeks and a really good watchman or second mate who was very calm and a good teacher. It finally clicked and it came together. But probably the highlight of decking was we were coming northbound through the old Franklin Street Bridge in Peoria, which has long since been replaced. And it was about a 125-foot wide bridge with a 105-foot wide tow. We had 15 coal loads northbound, and I'm out on the starboard head, and it's cold, it's winter, and I could tell that, he's like, the pilot's like 15 feet on the bad side, 400 below, 15 feet on the bad, 300 below, still 15 feet on the bad. We're about, 100 feet from the pier when the mate comes over the speakerphone and said, "Jeff, take the lock line and drop it over the bow of the barge where it's going to hit the pier." So I did that. And of course, we hit the pier. The 5 loads broke away from the other 10. And we're just floating there. And it took probably about 20 minutes for the pilot to get the tow stopped, back up, lasso the other 5 loads, put them back in tow, and we kept going. And, it was cold. The steel was brittle, and that probably, saved the barge from sinking. The mate was very happy with me and said, "Boy, by God, maybe we can call you a riverman now."
Were you standing on one of the barges that broke away?
Yes.
How was that?
Oh, you kind of had to make sure you were ducking the wires and the chain links that came flying by, but I came out unscathed.
Anything else interesting happen on your tenure out there?
No, it was pretty routine. I mean, we had high water. One of the trips, it was an old deckhand in his 50s and been out there forever. And I never realized it until many years later, but we had high water, and I just stepped off the edge of the barge onto the bank down on the lower somewhere to run a wire around a tree to tie off for the fog. And he said, he was telling somebody else, he said, "By God, old Jeff here just stepped off, walked about 50 feet around a tree and come back, and we're tied off." And I didn't realize how much the river fluctuates and how many rocks and there are on Low River. Many years later, I was out there riding in Low River on an excursion barge, and couldn't believe how much climbing and that I avoided with the high water. So that was probably one of the other noteworthy things that happened. But I mean, other than that, it was pretty routine. We didn't sink barges. We had a lot of pumps on barges, but I wasn't on any boats that hit any bridges or anything like that.
And tell me again, you crossed over shoreside. Was that with SCNO?
Yes.
Tell me about that transition. And where were you?
I was in St. Louis. We had an office in downtown Clayton, and I, just made a cold call. I was kind of intrigued by them. They were the biggest Missouri River carrier, and in Columbia, we would party on the banks of the Missouri River from time to time and watch the occasional towboat go by. And so I was familiar with them, and just made a cold call. I did go to Valley Line. They didn't have an opening, but Sioux City did. And I think I got hired for $725 a month. Like I said, I was an operations clerk working for this young woman. And then about 6 months later, I started barging, boat dispatching. Did that for about 3 years, and then they transferred me down to New Orleans to run the fleets down there, which was the old SCNO fleet in Luling, right above the Luling Bridge, which I think is now part of Knott's.
Well, how was barge dispatch back in those days?
Lots of pen and pencils. You know, it was before fax machines. It was before the big technical breakthrough was a Twig machine, where you would type in your orders and then send it over to the boat, and they would get it on their Twig machine. So it was, you know, it was before, like I said, before faxes and all that. So it was interesting, but it was a lot of communications. We'd run single sideband radios, and auto candies would you know, step on us sometimes. So we had to work our time to avoid their traffic as well. Lots of phone calls, you know, marine operators, you couldn't talk to the boats hardly direct much. But we got it done. I mean, we had 275, 300 barges, and you know, we were a middle-sized barge line back then.
What areas did you dispatch?
The lower, the Ohio, and then weekend duties on the Missouri and the Illinois.
How many boats and barges did SCNO have at the time?
We had about 300 barges, I think probably about 30 tank barges. They were mostly molasses northbound and soybean oil and tallow southbound. We probably had about 30 boats. I think we were running 15, 18 boats on the Missouri in its heyday. Our biggest boat on the lower was a 5,000 until we built the Robert Crown, which I think is now the Ricky Hughes. We built that in 75. That was a 7,200. And that was the flagship of the fleet.
And how did your career advance from there?
I got transferred down to New Orleans to run the SCNO fleet in 76. Joe Cadero was one of my mentors, and he was the vice president of sales and operations, and a very good teacher. Been around the industry, a number of companies, and he was one of my fans. So he got me promoted down there to run the fleet, and I stayed there for 2.5 years, and I went to Federal Barge Lines in 1978 as vice president general manager of Triangle Fleet, which was well, Ingram's reserve fleet now. And we also had Carrollton Avenue, which is now part of CCI's Westwego fleet. And then we had two 10.5s and a 9,000 running on the lower, along with a bunch of 6,000s, and about 750, 800 barges, probably about 18 to 20 boats.
And how long did you do that?
In 85, Ohio River Company bought us. We were up for sales. A bunch of executives from St. Louis Ship and Pot Industries, our parent, were told they were going to get a chance to do a leverage buyout. And Ken Lay of Enron fame pulled the rug out from under him and sold the company to Ohio River Company without giving them a chance to put anything together. And that was in January 1st of 85. And then I think Ingram bought Ohio River in 02 or 03. But there was, you know, certainly a bigger company. The parent company was in Boston, and Boston thinks they're the birthplace of civilization, and anybody that lives west of Philadelphia is nothing but a common hayseed. So they were pretty arrogant people to work with.
How did that transition go, and how much longer were you there?
I was there about 6.5 years. It went well. It was a big company, offshore tug and barge units that went over to Tampa. One took grain down to Puerto Rico. The other two did phosphate rock from Tampa to Uncle Sam at Mosaic. Big line boats, and then the federal boats really complemented what Ohio River had to begin with. They had Gulf and Ohio River Company for union purposes. And like I said, I was there for about 6.5 years, and then left and went to work with Mark Kanoy at Mark Twain Trading up in Pekin, Illinois.
And you said you were a VP at that point prior to going up
Yeah.
to see Mark?
Yes.
What was the over ops or fleeting and dispatch?
Fleeting and fleet dispatch.
And over that period, did you find time to familiarize yourself with boats and I guess the operations side? I know where you've recently retired.
Yeah, I mean, all the fleets that I managed had repair operations, cleaning and repair operations, as you had to in order to for the change of cargo and even just to check the barges over, even if you were sending them northbound empty to reload grain. So we had those operations at every fleet that I was involved with. I did get more responsibility under Ohio River Company. At one point, we had the old Orgo fleet, which is now Zito's. We had a fleet out at Michoud. We were running coal from New Orleans to Pensacola and Panama City. And then I was over the Baton Rouge Capital Fleet for a while up there as well.
Under what ownership?
Ohio River Company.
Okay.
In the late 80s and early 90s.
Well, where did you meet Mark Kanoy?
His father was a port captain for me at Federal Barge Lines. And so I met Mark through his dad, Delbert, who was both a pilot and an engineer. So Delbert had what they call a double ender, dual licenses.
Well, tell me about the move back to Illinois and into business with Mark.
Oh, it was kind of like going back up north in exile for about 5.5 years, and got divorced before I moved back, and met my present wife up there. She was a customer of ours. She had been at ACBL and got laid off through a reduction in force and ended up working for Combined Transportation and then a scrap company. So I was up there with Mark for 2 years. And like I tell people, the river offers many, many opportunities for employment in that, but it can also take it away, as the flood of '93 put us out of business. That lasted with Mark about 2 years. And then I went into work when I went to work for Hilton Gaming. We were supposed to have 2 casino boats in downtown Kansas City. And through a number of reasons, Hilton management wasn't on top of it. The Port of Kansas City said, "Don't worry about the Corps of Engineers. We have them in our back pocket. You'll get all the permits you need." And both sites where the boats were supposed to be would have impeded up navigation. And this was like 4 months after Amtrak Mobile, where 47 people died in the Amtrak train crash in Mobile, and the Coast Guard just checked not safe. So they ended up laying off everybody. We had about 45 people in the office, laid off everybody but 3, rightfully so, and ended up building the boats on the bank in a moat and going. That took at least 2.5 years before they were back into business or open for business. And anyway, it was my introduction to the passenger vessel, which served me well later. After from there, I went to Lamont and worked for Leo Catoni at Illinois Marine for 3 years. Married my wife, and then in '97 came down to New Orleans to help start up river barge excursion lines. which for lack of a better term was a cruise ship on the rivers on 2 barges. One barge had 98 staterooms on 2 levels, and the second barge had all the public space, galley, dining room, theater, libraries, lobbies. Well done. Eddie Conrad was the brains behind it, and the thought of putting it together. Prior to that, he'd done RVs on deck barges, and this was kind of the next evolution of that. And I was there for about 11 years, and we showed about 70,000 people what the rivers in the United States have to offer as far as scenery, itineraries, places, unique cities to visit. And it was a great experience, and kind of got me back to the river itself.
What size were those barges?
300 by 54. They were old Port Arthur towing barges.
And how were they built to sustain guests?
Levac Shipyard in Jennings, or actually Mermentau, Louisiana, built it, and we concreted over the deck and had a camber to it to make sure that it didn't pond water or anything like that, and built a superstructure on top of it. They drew about 5.5 feet. All of the tankage and that was down below. The generators were down below. All the generators for the barges were in the hull. And then we had 2 levels of about 50 rooms on each level, 200 square feet rooms, all balconies, or well, the upper deck had balconies. The lower deck just had picture windows looking out. We would have entertainment come on in the areas we happened to be in. And so it was a great product, but it was difficult marketing, and the recession of 2008 and 2009 put it out of business. I left about 6 months before that and went to AEP.
What size tug was shoving those around, and where did they run?
It was a 3200 Miss Nari, the first Z-drive towboat in the industry, built in 1981, 82 with Nagata engines and Nagata Z-drives, which are Japanese. Our boarding destination cities were Port Isabel, Texas, Galveston, Texas, New Orleans, Memphis, St. Louis, Cincinnati, Nashville, Pittsburgh. Most of the trips were a week, and you'd have turnovers in those cities every day or every week. We had some trips that were longer. There was a St. Louis to New Orleans trip, ran the Intercoastal Canal to Galveston and ultimately down to Port Isabel, stopped in Corpus. A lot of great scenery and just wonderful times on the river.
Well, what happened next for you after you left that company?
I went to work for AEP, and running the fleets down in New Orleans. We had Convent, which we had 3 anchorages with, and then we had Dockside Fleet. And I was there for about 3.5 years, and then when Kanoy came over to ACBL, I came over with him along with Paul Tobin and Bob Blocker. And so I've been with, let's see, it'll be 12 years in September with ACBL.
And walk me through your career with them.
Started out as vice president of Gulf operations, and which was Houston, Mobile, and let's see, we had Tiger Fleet, Armont Fleet, and Harahan. And then in November of 15, we bought AEP, so we added Convent and Dockside to that mix, in Belmont. And then ultimately I was in charge of Cairo and Lamont. So I had all the fleeting operations in the entire company. And then gradually let's see, Cairo Fleet and Lamont Fleet went to Mike Drawn a couple years ago, and then I was just in the Gulf. And then we hired a Michael L. Fordish about a year ago, and he's taken over my place in the Gulf. So he's got Houston and Mobile and the fleets in the river. And Dockside Fleet got sold to Turn Services probably back in 18, I think, something like that. So, we've got the 5 fleets in the river: Tiger, Armont, Belmont, Convent, and Harahan.
What was a day in the life of a VP of Gulf operations?
Oh, I don't know. You come in about 10, make sure everything's floating, and go to lunch about 10:30, come back about 2, make sure everything's floating, and go home at 3.
Sounds like the dream job.
Right. No, it was just, one of the things I guess I've always loved about the career I've had is every day is different. And the number of days I've woken up where I thought, oh, geez, I got to go to work again. I can probably count on one hand. I've always looked forward to it. I've enjoyed it. You try and problem prevent. But a lot of times you're in the midst of problem solving. So it's just it's kind of like whack-a-mole, which problem pops up the highest and needs the most attention. You've got, hundreds of people, there's people issues, not everybody performs at the level you'd like them to. You try and stimulate them to do better, and some do and some don't. And I knew the workings of a barge line, and I always tried to make the best decision for the overall barge line instead of just for the fleets.
And do you have children?
Yeah, I've got one daughter in Charleston, South Carolina, who's got two grandsons, 8 and 6. And then I've got 2 stepchildren that I raised. There was 10 and 12. One lives with us with a granddaughter that's 14, and the other one lives about a mile from us that's has granddaughters that are 5 and 3. So I've got 3 kids and 5 grandkids.
Did anybody follow you into the industry?
No.
Okay.
No, the closest I've got is my son-in-law in Charleston sells container freight for CMA-CGM.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Is your wife retired as well?
Yes. In fact, she was the first female to sell barge freight in the industry for ACBL. She started in ACBL in 1972, and at the age of 17, and got to selling freight, and most recently retired from Celtic Marine in 2017.
I need to chat with her on the show sometime as well. Well, so you said you're in a consulting function currently. What does that mean? Or what are you up to these days with that?
Oh, I've just got a couple projects that I'm still involved with that haven't been, we're waiting for to get some information on them as to whether we're going to pursue them or not from the owners of the property, some fleeting expansion projects that we're looking at. So those are probably the 2 things I'm involved with. Every now and then somebody will call up with a question about something in the past that I may or may not be able to answer. So it's pretty light.
Any big plans for retirement?
No, just a little more golf and travel. So my wife golfs, so we go on golf trips on vacation and that.
That sounds pretty peaceful. Have you heard of the Maritime Throwdown?
Yes.
What do you think of the program?
It's at IMAX, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
I'm not all that familiar with it, Tim, but anything that can promote the industry is certainly good.
And what do you think about my little project here?
I think it's great. I need to find out how to get on it more so I can look at what you're doing. I know Mark Canoy speaks highly of it as well.
Yeah, I do appreciate his participation for sure, but I'll get you a couple of links. We'll get you watching podcasts.
That'd be great.
In the meantime, sir, I thank you very much for your time this morning. I'll have this published sooner or later here.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.